Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for opting out for this event rather than a beer garden or anything else that's not currently happening in Prague. It is my absolute delight to introduce our special guest tonight, Vincent Woods. Before I do that, however, I would like to thank yet again the Irish Embassy and the Department for Foreign Affairs for helping us fund our activities. Without this, things like this would be impossible, so a big thank you. I'll say a few words about Vincent, then Vincent will read an extract from one of his plays. We've prepared some questions together, so we'll just chat a bit, and that at some point we'll hand over to you if there's anything you'd like to ask about Vincent's work for the stage or his broadcasting, anything you like. So that's the scenario for this evening. Vincent Woods is, in no particular order, a playwright, poet, and broadcaster. His plays include At the Black Pig's Dyke, which was premiered by the Druid Theatre in Galway in 1992. And this play is currently being translated into Czech, which I believe is going to be the first translation into any language with the exception of the Irish. He is also the author of another major play called A Cry from Heaven, which was premiered at the Abbey Theatre in 2005. He's written plays for the radio. He's the author of 2 poetry collections, The Colour of Language and Lives and Miracles, and has co-edited several volumes. First, The Turning Wave, Poems and Songs of Irish Australia. Then Fermata, Writings Inspired by Music. This was a book co-edited with Eva Burke. Leaves of Hungry Grass, Poetry in Ireland's Great Hunger. And Borderlines, a book of poetry with an introduction by Henry Glassie, about whom later. With Edwina Guckian, he co-directed and produced the film Bealach Aner Cortech, Hunger's Way, for Strokestown International Poetry Festival. He has scripted and presented many arts programs and documentaries on RTE Radio, including the monumental The County Measure, a radio atlas of local Irish cultures broadcast between 2022 and 2024 that you can still listen to on the RTE player. He has been a writer in residence at NUI Galway, where he taught drama and creative writing, and is the poet laureate for Carrick-on Shannon County Leitrim. Welcome, Vincent, to Prague.
Lovely to be here. As we were chatting earlier this afternoon, and I explained that I was here for the first time last October with my friend Eva Burke. We took a train from Berlin and had 3 wonderful days here. So I got to wander and get a strong sense of the city. What a wonderful city it is. And it's just delightful to be back. And sometime it was spring of last year, I had an email out of the blue from Monica here to say, I discovered your play at the Black Pig's Dyke and would love to translate it into Czech. And needless to say, that made not just my day, but week, month, and a lot of the year. And we met then last summer and talked and planned a bit, and now I'm here, and it's really lovely to be here.
Could you give us a flavour of the play that you just mentioned?
I suppose, we'll talk about the play in a while, but just a very brief summary of it. It's a play set on the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It moves through time. It uses this theatrical form called mumming, where a group of performers perform these little ritual plays of conflict, death and resurrection. And these characters are all dressed in elaborate costumes made from straw, entire body costumes, huge masks. So it's profoundly theatrical. And this was a tradition in many parts of Ireland, and especially so in this border community where the play is set, in parts of North Leitrim and South Fermanagh. And in writing the play, I kind of delved into mythology, but also into history, politics, poetry, my own family stories, life. A great deal of life poured into the play. And as happens, and many of you will know this, as happens when you set off on any creative project, all kinds of unexpected things happen, and the journey takes you to places you don't necessarily expect. So there's a preface, a little, again, very theatrical turn at the beginning of the play, beginning of Act 1, kind of prelude really, which continues then beginning of Act 2 and concludes the play. And it's a slightly mysterious story which is told by a young woman dressed in white who's holding a clutch of poppies, and she kind of unpicks the poppies as she speaks, and more of that will become clear in a while. So this is from the opening sequence. It was a long time ago, and it was not a long time away. So it was a long time ago, and it was not far away. It was in a land where the black pig had furrowed an endless tunnel under the earth, and where it ran still, trapped and frantic beneath the ground. At that time there was a strange knight on the road. He met a woman with a riddle. How many people were in the world before the world was made? How many graves did it take to bury them? What way were they laid? Facing north, south, east, or west? And did they rest or not from then till now? He said he'd answer any riddle in 3 parts, but not in 4. So she rose her hook to kill him. But if she did, he shot her first, through the heart, with a golden bullet. The strange night went on till he arrived at a fair, where 2 men were having a dispute over a piece of land. He said he could settle it, and offered a fine price to whichever of them would sell it to him. One man said he'd sell it that minute. The other said he wouldn't sell it for love or money. So the strange knight said to the second man, "You're the owner. It's your land." Then he shot the 2 of them and had the land for himself.
Thank you very much. Now, of course, when the play was first staged, all of this very much would have resonated, with Irish audiences, with what was going on in Northern Ireland. And there is the image of the poppies that comes into the play, particularly at the end of the play, which, after all kinds of horrific things happen, there's that moment of possibly hope at the end, which is achieved mostly wordlessly through a gesture with those poppies. Could you perhaps comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, some of the genesis of the play goes back to the late 1980s, when I was working as a radio journalist in RTE in Dublin, and in November '87, the IRA placed bombs at Memorial Day event in Enniskillen in County Fermanagh. Several people were killed at the Poppy Day memorial service, and I was working the next morning, and we were listening to BBC Radio, and a voice came through on the airwaves of a man talking, and it was somehow utterly compelling. I listened and I thought, this voice seems terribly familiar somehow. It was the voice of a man called Gordon Wilson, whose daughter Mary had been killed in that bomb. She was a nurse. She was trapped under the rubble. She lived for a short while and he held her hand. And so he described holding his daughter's hand under the rubble. And he talked about how he said to her once, "Are you all right, Mary?" She said, "I am that." He said a second time, "Are you all right, Mary?" "I am that." And he asked her a third time. There was silence. She was dead. And at the time he spoke these extraordinary words of forgiveness, saying he didn't want any retaliation. He talked about he didn't want any more dirty deeds done. And he later became a senator in the Republic in Dublin. But it turned out that in fact Gordon was originally from a little town called Fermanagh, which is where I was born, a little town called Manorhamilton in North Leitrim, which is where I was born. And his family moved to Fermanagh to Enniskillen in the 1930s. He was Methodist and an extraordinary man. And so the image, the young woman in the play, that slightly mythical figure who tells that mysterious story and who picks apart the poppies, which at the end of the play drift to the ground, is in a way symbolic of the spirit of Mary Wilson, who in turn is symbolic of so many people who died in those terrible years of conflict in Northern Ireland. But in a sense too, and this is something that I think is deep in the play, it's much bigger than Northern Ireland or Ireland. The play is universal. The themes of conflict are universal, as they are in the Mummers play, with these little seemingly simple, slightly funny, slightly disturbing dramas of conflict and death and resurrection, where at the end one of the heroes who has been killed is brought back to life by a doctor. And the play ultimately offers a very tentative regrowth, the possibility of, the last line of the play is restoring the land to life and the beginning of happiness. So it's a tentative offering of hope, as it was at that time, and this was 1992. The initial discussions about a ceasefire and a peace agreement were underway, but it was still a very volatile time in Northern Ireland. And you know, while the play became something of almost of a cause célèbre, you know, it was seen as slightly daring, as confronting some of the futility of especially Irish Republican violence, but all violence. And you know, I got a little bit of kickback, even though the majority of people seemed to really appreciate the play and its message, which was also examining hard history and putting things out there that weren't always talked about. How war is often used to cover up dirty deeds. You know, how political violence can be used as a mask to steal, to plunder, to rape, and we see it now. We see it. This is war, and yeah. But I remember when the play was staged in London in those years. It was about 94. And there was a discussion afterwards, and there was one man, very, very intense fellow in the front row, who was looking at me very intensely and intently, and he came up to me afterwards and he said, I was trying to work out, he was from Northern Ireland. He had been a Republican prisoner, and he said, I couldn't understand why you could write a play like that. I couldn't understand. He said, and I thought it must have been because you spent all those years working radio and you were kind of fooled into thinking like this. He said, but I understand a little bit more now, after both seeing the play and to hear the discussion. So I thought, good, you know, this is how we turn things. It's by putting them out there, by putting them in the light, by not flinching from them, and by being open about them. So it's, you know, it's the play remains very special to me, for many reasons. One of the great inspirations for it is the work of this man, Henry Glassie, who's a wonderful American folklorist, ethnologist who lived in Fermanagh for about 10 years through the 1970s. In a small community, a place called Ballymonone, which isn't really on any map, but it's real, it's there, and Henry lived with the people and wrote a number of wonderful books out of that time. This book, which was published in 1975, so 50 years ago this year, and it's an account of mumming in that small community from many different perspectives, from both sides of the community, if you like, Catholic people from Ballymonone, Protestant people from Ballymonone, and Henry mediates it all and finds this line that keeps people together, and he concludes that mumming, that the performance of these little ritual plays at midwinter. So then, you know, it was people went around from house to house in the depths of midwinter to perform in these small kitchens, these little plays, where a troupe of people come in these elaborate straw costumes. It must have been huge in these small spaces. And the two heroes, there are these sometimes wonderfully funny rhymes that people use to introduce themselves as set of stock characters. Doctor, two fools, a male fool and a female fool, Tom Fool and Miss Funny, which echoes a very ancient Gaelic tradition of a male fool called a nomadon and a female fool called a nonsha. They were kind of stock characters going way back in performance in Ireland, and the two heroes who can be taken to represent two sides in any conflict, who fight. One is killed and then is brought back to life by the doctor at the end of the play. And interestingly, the hero who's killed switched sides depending on what house people were going to. So it was, and this is what Henry is getting at in the book as well, how these little ritual plays help to negotiate and almost keep at bay the possibility of bigger conflict. But it's a wonderful book if you ever get a chance to get hold of it. And Henry's drawings are exquisite as well. His drawings of the mummers parading in the countryside, performing in the kitchens. They're wonderfully playful and very beautiful.
Did you actually ever get to meet Henry Glassie while writing the play or afterwards? Because I know he wrote an essay to a book of poems of yours.
Yeah, I didn't meet him while I was writing the play, and I didn't know if he'd ever even heard of the play or was aware of it. And then I met him and his wife Pravina at a conference on mumming in Derry City in 2004. And we became great friends. I gave a talk on the play and on mumming. He and Pravina were the audience. I went to Fermanagh the next day to hear a talk he was giving. We became great friends. And in fact, next week he's getting an honorary doctorate from University College Dublin for his work in Ireland. And I'll see them next week. And yeah, we've done a lot of work together since this little book, Borderlines, which is just a small selection of poems by me on people, lives, history, nature in Leitrim, and an essay by Henry on place and identity in general, but particularly focused on his time in Fermanagh. So it's in a way again tracing this permeable border, because let's face it, most borders are permeable, and that's what makes them interesting. Ultimately, that we can cross them, and we do. And I should say as well that the Black Pig's Dyke, which is of course a slightly intriguing name, is the actual name of an Iron Age fortification in Ireland, which separated part of the kingdom, the old kingdom of Ulster, from the rest of the country. So it almost, if you imagine something like Hadrian's Wall in Britain, it was an earth and wattle fortification, parts of which are still there, which ran from the Cooley Peninsula in Louth, on the east coast, right across part of the country over to the coast of Donegal. Part of it ran between Leitrim and Fermanagh. And when I was a boy growing up on a small farm in rural Leitrim in the northwest of Ireland, our grandmother, my mother's mother, came to live with us for a while. And she would tell this story about the Black Pig's Dyke. And this motif occurred in different parts of the country, where there was a belief that one day there would be a great battle, almost the battle to end all battles and end all ages, would take place on a site along the Black Pig's Dyke. And my grandmother imagined that it would happen quite close to where we lived. And in her version as well, it would be a great battle between Catholics and Protestants, even though we were long past that point, not. But the image that really fascinated me, which she talked about as well, was that the fortification, the Black Pig's Dyke, had been created, had been made by a black pig being trapped under the earth and running frantically along this line and pushing the earth up. And in the story, the pig would run eternally under the earth until the battle happened. And it is such a brilliant image, and it is pure poetry. It's the poetry of mythology. How could one resist it? And so it became this very potent image for conflict and for the potentially endless nature of conflict unless something happens to stop it. And in a way, that's what I was trying to do with the play. I don't mean to stop the conflict, but to call attention again to the need to stop it.
If we can talk about A Cry from Heaven now, that's a really original take on the story of Deirdre and the Sons of Uisnech, which of course was very much the focus of attention of revivalist writers. There were versions first by Standish James O'Grady, Eleanor Hull, Lady Gregory, and then you almost had a competition about whose Deirdre plays going to be the best. You have a version by W.B. Yeats and John Nicholson. James Stephen wrote a novel based on the story. But your twist on the story was quite interesting. I have a question specifically related to this, and that is, can you, as a playwright writing in 2005, rely on the familiarity of your audiences in Ireland with the story, the way, say, authors of Greek tragedy would, where you know, they could, you know, people came to the theatre knowing the story of Medea, and then if you were Euripides, you were just, you know, surprising them with certain twists and, you know, making certain points. Can you do this with an Irish audience, just to trust that they will actually know a version of the story from before?
No, no, you can't. I knew the story of Deirdre. It's one of the great, the three sorrows of Irish storytelling. Deirdre, the Sons of Ushna, and I had read it as a schoolboy, and it fascinated me again, partly for the power of prophecy and repetition. The story is that Conor, the High King, is to marry, and his wife is pregnant. The baby cries from her mother's womb, and this is interpreted as portending a terrible disaster, that the child, the girl of course, will bring tragedy and ruination, and so everything unfolds from there, and it's a huge sweep of tragedy where the baby is born, grows up to be a great beauty, and of course ultimately, yes, brings great sorrow and ruin to Ulster. But I wanted to do something a little more with it. So it's largely again a verse play, as you know, a good deal of Black Pig's Dyke, not all of it is, but Cry from Heaven is written in blank verse and is framed within again huge sweep of time, opening at Samhain, heading towards midwinter, at a time when it's believed the spirits of the dead can come back, and there's an intriguing character, the character of the nurse in the play, Larkham, who observes everything. She rears Deirdre, she loves her, and Deirdre elopes with one of the sons of Ushna, with Nisha, and the brothers. They go to Scotland, and eventually are lured back on the promise of being forgiven, and lured back to Ireland. And you know, again, it's a great battle. I extended the line in the play, and so Deirdre dies, as she does in the story, but her son lives for a while, and the play was directed in the Abbey in 2005 by a quite famous French director, Olivier P, who brings an enormous sweep of the visual to his theatrical presentations. And I'd seen his version of Claudel's The Satin Slipper, Le Soulier de Satan, in Orléans in 2004, I think. And so he did remarkable things with the set, with weather, with rain. It was pretty full on, and I remember actually I was very chuffed at one point because there were mixed reactions to the play and to the production. People saying, why wasn't it done in a traditional way? I was saying, what's a traditional way, etc. But I remember being in a restaurant a couple of months later, and with some friends from Mexico, and I was signing a check or something, and the waiter looked at me and he said, are you the man who wrote that play that was on the Abbey? And I said, yeah. And I thought, what am I going to get? And he said, oh, I loved that play. He said, I went to see it 5 times. So again, you think, good, you know, it's like the guy in London who says, now I understand. You're always hoping for the people who will maybe have the patience to listen deeply, to look behind what might seem like a great big facade of stuff and delve in. You know, in many ways, A Cry from Heaven is a darker play than Black Pig's Dyke. You know, the Black Pig's Dyke ends, as we said, with that offering of hope, where there is the possibility of regrowth. And again, it's actually that there's an image at the end of the play which is women harnessing the plough and ploughing the land to restore the beginning of life and beginning of happiness. Cry from Heaven ends rather more, you know, tending towards a delve into darkness. And I just read this tiny little bit from the end, which gives you a sense of something, I suppose, of the rhythm of the playing. A few voices in it. We gather here again as we did that sound, which is when the play opened, when it seemed that peace was sealed and we drank to future day. So well she might have cried, Deirdre from her mother's womb, cried for what she knew would come from such cracked and sullied pledges. Ness, Conor's mother, you brought me back to guard your son and keep your grip on power, too late to guard him against you and from himself, at the self you made him. The twisted balance might have held, but for the tilt of fate that came, the shape that lies before us broken now. All Deirdre's store and ours incarnate here. The marching road from Connacht bringing conquest, the kingdom gone. Our life, a fallen deer. This one I should have held so tightly in my arms and wrapped out evil from her, wrapped out all this before her life began. Too late. Now all is done. And Larkin, the nurse, ends the play. Done within my arms a sleepless infant, the waking dreams of life all shuttered now, the shades of love adrift in famished gardens, the mouldered kisses broken in the clay. Give single cry all Ulster to this passing, let muffled heart bells toll the grieving way. The horsemen near, here fall their shadowed hoofbeat. Quench out all light, let darkness rule the day.
Now, as this was written a few years after the Good Friday Agreement, and it's an Ulster story, it strikes me as a very grim ending indeed, and where I was what I was hinting at with that reference to the Greek tragedies, because clearly anybody who knows the story knows that there is no happy ending, but in your version there is no happy ending twice. I'm not doing spoilers, but it struck me as really powerful, but at the same time truly grim. Was that how you were feeling about?
Well, I suppose it's not even so much that yes, it is grim. I mean, because the play opens with this mock ritual battle between the bulls of night and day, black bull, white bull, and the white bull wins. So light wins at the beginning, but by the end of the play, all light is quenched, darkness rules the day. I suppose it wasn't even a deliberate commentary on Ireland or Northern Ireland at that time, so much as a deep delve into the human spirit that seems to impel so much conflict, so much war, so much repetition of what we think is resolved, what we think is settled, and sadly, even in the last 5 years, more and more of that has seemed apparent, and I suppose it was trying to face up to the darkness as well that is there in ritual, but also there in all of us, and which, in my belief, it is all of our duty to deal with, to deal with for ourselves before we pitch out into the bigger world, whether that world is politics, or peacemaking, or theatre making, or poetry, or the arts, or whatever it is. We try to confront the darkness even in ourselves, so that we carry something else out into life. That's a remarkable thing. Actually, yesterday morning I got a taxi in Dublin from where I live. It's about a 20-minute drive to the airport, and this astonishing man who had celebrated his 80th birthday a few days earlier talked all the way to the airport, and he told me something I think I'll carry forever, where he said that he grew up in Dublin, in a working class, very poor inner city area, as almost it could be straight out of Sean O'Casey's plays, and he said that his father was dead at 49 from drink, from alcohol. His mother lived to be 94, and he said that was almost something like that was the case in almost every house. He said the pubs were full and the tables were empty. He said, but his mother fostered him, brought him, carried him, and his grandmother, his mother's mother, and he said, my grandmother said to me once, the love I give you is not yours to keep, it's yours to share. And I thought it was a wonderful, simple concept. The love I give you is not yours to keep, it's yours to share. And Craig is very different, but in confronting the darkness, it's also, in a way, an attempt to drive out the darkness. We let it in, so that there's the possibility or two of driving it out. And that's constant as well. I spend a good deal of time in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, in Derry, all around the place, and the tension is still there. People are trying, and the balance is holding, but the sparks are still around, and you can never ever loosen your grip on the force that hold it back. So anything we can do in the arts, in poetry, in plays, that help in any small way, to me it's really important to do that.
Thank you. Could I ask you about your work for the RT? If you were to comment on everything that you ever did and wrote and presented, we'd need another couple of hours. But I'm particularly interested in this absolutely amazing project called the County Measure, where you spent 2 years traveling around Ireland and making programs about local culture, anything from folklore to contemporary rap music, anything really. Could you tell us a little bit about how that came about, and whether you were to author all the episodes, of which there are quite a few?
Yeah, there are 32. We made 32 hour-long documentary programs, one on each county in Ireland, and it was in conjunction with the Department of culture, arts tourism, and partly for this decade of centenaries in Ireland, you know, where there was a particular period from 2016 to roughly take it 2014, 15, to 24, which marked the centenary of the 1916 Rising, of the War of Independence, the Civil War, Irish independence, and so it came out of a smaller project I'd done a few years earlier, where I made 3 programs on 3 different counties, and some of the people in RT remember those clearly. They came to me and said, would you take on this project? We have funding, and I said, yes, we'll do it. And it was a huge amount of work, but it was really, really enjoyable work. I mean, I got to travel all around Ireland with a tiny team. It was just me and there were 2 producers. I traveled with a different one for every other program, and because we had a little bit of a budget, we were able to commission a new piece of music for each county and a new piece of writing, and so it was also about making new things happen, and I believe very passionately in that too. You know, we shouldn't always repeat, you know, that you make the new, you try to put more things into life. So it was great to be able to commission, as you said, you know, like a new piece of Irish language rap from Kerry, or a piece of punk from Belfast, beautiful traditional music from Donegal. So this myriad of voices, and this is one of the things that strikes me all the time, that Ireland is hugely music. I had a great friend, Mick Maloney, who was a wonderful musician and singer. He was professor of Irish Studies in New York University for years. He died 2 years ago. But Mick used to say, and he spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia, and every time he came back to Ireland, Mick would say, I'd almost forgotten how astonishing it is, how much music there is. You know, you step into any small community and you scratch a bit and you'll find music. As you find talk, stories, memories. So, you know, I loved stepping, and I did all the driving. I loved stepping out of the car, sometimes to meet people, which was prearranged, but sometimes not at all. We stepped out and wandered and walked and talked to people, and we found these extraordinary stories, testimonies, memories, snippets of humor, of, you know, heartfelt emotion of all kinds, and it, you know, I came away from it all very optimistic about the future, because it felt like everywhere there are good people, decent people who are doing good things for their community. They're not doing these things for money, for profit, for ego. They're doing it for the good of everyone around. And you know, it was a real privilege to make those programs, and they're now part of I think a pretty important archive, where there are voices from this time, from each county. And, you know, for instance, last year in Derry, we went to Balahi, to the Seamus Heaney Centre, and walked in that landscape where Heaney had grown up, down by the lake where he and his father had fished, and talked to a wonderful local woman who knew the family. She talked about the landscape and its significance in Heaney's work, and I got to visit Seamus's grave in the little cemetery in Balahi, and that was very moving. I mean, I was saying that to you earlier. I knew Seamus Heaney and had interviewed him a number of times. He was a wonderful man, and to stand by his grave and read the inscription, which is a line from a poem of his, which is, walk on air against your better judgment. I think it's so wonderful. And it's like another gesture of generosity from a very generous poet to those of us who are still alive, and who might falter at times in what we're doing, how we're looking ahead, what we think we get the courage to do, the will to do, the ability to do. I thought, okay, walk on air against your better judgment. It's a wonderful thing to carry, but all around the country there were wonderful people, and it's also very interesting to reflect the new realities of Ireland, the changing demographics, the voices of people who have come from Nigeria, from Ukraine, from different parts of Eastern Europe, from pretty much all around the world really, and this wonderful woman in Longford, from Nigeria, and she's a little, mainly a fabric and clothes shop, but there's some food in there as well, off the main square in Longford town. And we're chatting, and she said, oh yes, she said, you know, we're all of my family, we're all here, we all now are very proud to be from Longford. And when we're in England, when we go and maybe anywhere else, and people say, where are you from? She said, we're delighted to be able to say, we're from Longford. And so all of these voices are there. Look, it's just you know, we call it a radio atlas of Ireland. So it felt like making this soundscape, which will be there hopefully forever, whatever forever is. Those voices, you know, ring out. And you know, for me, as a, you know, say, Ondřej was saying, I do a lot of different things, but they all, for me, come back to the same instinct, which is that you want to put something back into life. You want to give something back. You know, I was privileged in growing up you know, we were poor. It was a small farm, there wasn't much money, and I was really, you know, just as young as 7. Most of the others didn't have a chance to get an education. I did, and so I'm really aware of the privilege I've had and the support I've had. So I feel in a way that it's incumbent on me and people like me to give something back. So whatever I write, whatever I do, song lyrics I write, work I do for radio, is also about giving something back and putting something, trying to place something back into life, and something that might inspire somebody else, or help somebody else, or shine a little bit of light into the way.
So what are you currently working on, if it's not secret?
It's never a secret. I'm writing a lot of new poetry. I'm working with a wonderful woman called Edwina Guckian, who is a dancer and multi-form artist, on a little show which will go on in the autumn, which will mark another centenary of, in 1925, the Irish government introduced the Dance Hall Act, which tried to shift music performance and dance out of people's houses and into local halls, which were mainly run by the parish priest. So it was a way of attempting to take back control of freedoms, and you know, it's part of a significant cultural shift in the country post-independence. So we're making a show which is the main impetus of which will be dance and music, but there's a little bit of drama thrown in there as well, and so that's a bit of fun as well. And actually, Edwina, I must show you something. It's this very lovely tote bag which Edwina designed, which has an image of a troupe of mummers on it. And Edwina is one of the people who has kind of helped revive mumming in Leitrim. And but more extraordinarily, in a way, she's encouraged farmers to, this is called this reseeding project, to get farmers to grow oats again, so that you actually have the means to make the costumes, to make, to create the straw, to do it from scratch. And I'm reminded actually that when at the Black Pig's Dyke went to Canada, to Montreal, two things happened actually. One was that a marvellous Ugandan playwright came up to me afterwards, and a man called George Saremba, who later came to live in Ireland, and he said, "Well, Vincent, this play is African." And I thought, great, here it is, here's the universal, it's set in Ireland, but it carries, the impulse of it carries to anywhere. And another couple, a man and a woman, came to me afterwards, and they had actually driven from Montreal to Toronto, and they were originally from South Leitrim, not terribly far from where I grew up, and they had this kind of really sad story about how a local woman, a neighbour of theirs, this would have been in the late 50s, maybe early 1960s, used to make entire costumes from mummers' costumes, straw costumes, with these wonderful straw hats, masks, leggings, body armour, leggings, the whole lot. And one time, I think it was shortly after they got married, they were going back to Canada, and she made an entire outfit for them to bring back. And when they were going through customs, it was taken from them. Man said, "I saw it being carried away on a cart." And I called them back, I said, what are you going to do with it? Where's it going? They said, "Too late, let's go to the incinerator." They were afraid that it would carry in any kind of bugs or anything. So he said, "We could never tell her." He said, every year afterwards when we went back, she'd say, "Have you still got your suit of straw?" And they'd say, "We have." At a special place. So, there's something wonderful about the idea that another young woman in that community is now reviving the tradition of making these outfits. So it feels, and with that and the play, it feels like some of the harm is taken out of that, and that something is restored again. Something's given back.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I think it's about time we hand it over to the audience. If you have any questions, anything you'd like to ask Vincent? There's a lot of other work that he had no chance to talk about.
When you were writing the play, what was the process like? And what part did you finish first? And what was the biggest challenge?
Yeah, it's an example of how we seldom write something. Well, occasionally you might write a poem, or and maybe especially a short poem, in one go, and in a linear fashion from beginning to end. But mostly, and especially with drama, with writing a play, I probably wrote about 7 drafts of every play, but Black Pig's Dyke. And the first piece I wrote was, there are two interior mummers plays within the larger framework of the play, and I wrote those 2 plays first, and one is an absolutely interior performance, which is performed within the context of the plot, and the other is performed out to the audience, and it's a bigger summary of the play. I wrote those, and then I went back into some of the more conventional scenes where people, real characters, interact and are in conflict, and and actually, and one of the last things, and the thing that bound it all together, came late, was that sequence of stories of the strange night, which I started with for the beginning, middle, and end. And so the structure, the overall structure, came through the process of writing, and that's often the case, that you set out with one particular idea or a set of ideas, and in the process of writing you discover new things, and the shape alters, and other forces seem to come in a way, and they do, and there is a little bit of a mystery about all these things, and just telling Ondřej earlier that there's quite a funny scene in the middle of the play where there's a mock wedding between the two fools, the male fool and the female fool, Tom Fool and Miss Funny, and there's a mock heroic speech or poem delivered by the captain of the mummers, and that is based completely on a memory that my parents had shared with me of a wedding in our locality in 1944, where two rather simple people got married, and a local man whose grandson, as my close friends, was the captain of the Straw Boys, who brought good luck to weddings, and he gave a mock heroic speech for this couple. But all that my parents remembered were the last two lines. So I sat down to write a mock heroic speech, and I followed a rhythm and a pattern, and I wrote whatever, it's maybe about 10 or 12 verses. And I went to see my neighbour, the son of the man who'd been captain of the Straw Boys, Paddy Murray, who was then in his early 80s and wasn't very well. And we chatted for a bit, and I told him what I was doing, and I read him the poem, the mock heroic poem speech. And he was silent for a little bit, and then he said, that's exactly the pattern and the rhythm that my father used. And that's it. I thought, yes, I remember walking back. I was staying with my parents at the time, and walking back into this huge winter sky, stars everywhere, and things do come to us. I do believe that. If you're open, if you're alert, things in a way come through us a bit as too. And but it's as I said earlier, a huge amount of life poured into that play, and kind of poured out the other end, and still doing so.
Thank you so much. I think it's time for us to join in a round of applause for this absolutely wonderful evening with Vincent. Thank you so much for sharing so much of your work and your process, but also your experience in life. It's really precious. Thank you.